In this next session coming up, so we are going to talk about publishing, open access products and practicalities. And then in session 3, we're going to talk a lot about promoting and using open access to increase impact and also resources like the Open Access Directory and ORCID. So first off, I'd like to start off with my colleague, my wonderful colleague, Natasha Mansour. She's the managing editor of the Gulf Education and Social Policy Review, published by the Sheikh Saud bin Saqr Al Qasimi Foundation for Policy Research. And for those of you who are on the chat, Dean is going to put a link to the webpage where you can read more of her bio and look at the agenda. Hello, Bakheet, I see you have your video on, but Natasha, if you want to go ahead and turn your video on, that would be terrific. And let's see where she is.
I believe I have my video on.
There you go. There you go. Bakheet, you know what? You're up. Yeah, there we go. All right. So Natasha, go ahead and you can just say a little bit more about yourself and get started.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Corinne. I'm so pleased to take part in this event, and many thanks to everyone at Knowledgey for their hard work in putting this event together. Next. So I'd like to begin with a brief introduction to Gulf Education and Social Policy Review, or Jesper for short. Jesper was launched in 2020 by the Al Qasimi Foundation as part of its ongoing commitment to open access knowledge, sharing, and to support scholarship on education and social policy issues in the Gulf region. Jesper is a double-blind, peer-reviewed, evidence-based journal meeting the demand for high-quality bilingual journals in the GCC region. We accept articles in both English and Arabic, and titles and abstracts for all articles appear in both languages. Jesper's articles have been on wide-ranging topics, including how to improve Arabic reading practices, parental involvement in their children's education in GCC countries, teacher marketization, teacher development and exchange programs, and women's educational aspirations. As a journal that specifically highlights applied and policy research, these articles make a meaningful contribution to understanding the field of education and social policies widely in the Gulf region. Next. So it was important to publish Jesper as an open access journal. As an open access journal, Jesper was founded to strengthen the research ecosystem and address the supply and demand issues in the region, including lack of research funding that I'll speak about in a bit, that inhibits access to quality research that is often found behind a paywall. Primarily, as we know, equitable dissemination of high quality research, which is a core value of open access model, is key. Readers whose institutions cannot afford these subscriptions to databases are restricted, and many of these readers are found in the Global South. Such practices in publishing challenge the potential impact, stakeholder buy-in, and long-term opportunities and reputations of studies, scholars, and institutions. One solution is, of course, to create high-quality, reputable open access journals which offer a rigorous peer review process. We also wanted to challenge existing norms. Social science scholars in the Global South, including the Gulf and Arab world, may feel obliged to publish only in Western journals in English, which appear to command greater prestige and value for career growth. Such practices can adversely support paradigms that marginalize local languages such as Arabic in the process. By accepting Arabic language articles, we underscore the value of all languages in research publications. And lastly, strengthening the open access model is also a key reason, because as a selective journal that prides itself in highlighting innovative research, Jesper aims to serve as a refutation against predatory journals that exploit the open access model for their own gain. Next. I think it's the slide. Thank you. So I go back a little bit now to understand the links between how open access can contribute to strengthening the research ecosystem. As we know, all GCC countries are transitioning to knowledge-based economies. Research's role in analysis and innovation and its dissemination is key to success in social and policy transformations to achieve these knowledge-based economies. Research can challenge previous norms, encourage growth, and promote new conversations. However, barriers remain in publishing quality academic research in the GCC. As you see in figure 1, most GCC countries, all of them actually, are far behind the OECD average in the amount of money that is spent in research and development in contrast to the GDP. And in figure 2, you see that the citable articles per 1,000 people are very low in all the countries, and citations per document are also extremely low in contrast to much more developed ecosystems, research ecosystems such as in UK and Singapore. So previous decades' low research productivity and subsequent weak effect on policies can be overcome by a rise in academic research. The rigorous evidence-based research has the potential to have a substantial effect on critical policymaking. However, at the current time, the GCC research community has only a limited role in shaping the national policies and limited influence on the public sector agenda. One way to strengthen the research ecosystem is to provide open access research to all to build and sustain networks to disseminate knowledge on key policy issues. Next. Lastly, I consider in the role of a managing editor to speak a little bit about the logistics and challenges of managing an open access journal, especially one that is relatively new. And some of these challenges could be similar to those of a non-open access journal as well. Many of these challenges or concerns are intricately linked. For example, in the process of building a pipeline of manuscripts, you're also coming up against authors' expectations of indexing and rankings. To be indexed in prestigious databases such as Scopus is a relatively long process, which can dissuade authors to submit their manuscripts. For example, a journal has to be at least 2 years old and publish a minimum of 25 to 30 articles to apply for Scopus indexing. A new journal will have to promote widely so that a steady pipeline of manuscripts are available for review and publication. Initially, since new journals are not indexed in prestigious databases, authors will have to manage their expectations when they submit their manuscripts to an unranked journal. Moreover, new journals are actively building a reputation, which ties into issues of selectivity and quality. One unique challenge may be preserving the quality of the journal to, again, combat the reputation that predatory journals have and how they take advantage of the OA model. And related to preserving quality is also issues of financial support. For example, Jesper is funded by the Qasimi Foundation in its entirety, and authors are not expected to pay any fees. This allows Jesper to be selective and highlight innovative research. To conclude, launching quality open access peer-reviewed bilingual journals in which both established and emerging scholars across the global landscape are comfortable sending submissions has the capacity to change the paradigm of academic publishing for increased equity and open exchange of ideas. Such initiatives will have the impact of highlighting lesser known but emerging voices who are engaging in critical issues, placing them in meaningful conversation with others across borders and boundaries. Thank you so much and for supporting open access research. And I see that the link is already here, or I'll put the link for Gulf Education and Social Policy Review in the chat for further information on how to submit and the aims and scopes of the journal.
Well, thank you so much, Natasha. I really appreciate you taking the opportunity to actually share with everybody a little bit about your experience in developing the journal and also the challenges that exist for a new journal. I also just want to thank Jesper for the work you're doing in trying to expand Arabic language research publications in the world at large. So we at Knowledgey, we're working towards a more knowledgeable world, the whole world, but we certainly have had our focus and our start here in the Arab world. And so we absolutely 100% want to help strengthen all of those kinds of Arabic language research as well as those journals. So thank you so much for sharing your information. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions from people who would like to learn about your experience. So we'll look forward to hearing you in the Q&A.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. So Dr. Bakheet is up next. We are delighted to have Dr. Bakheet here with us. He's a specialist librarian in the medical library at the Dubai Health Authority. And Dr. Bakheet, you can put your video on now and your microphone if you like. He's going to talk with us about the Dubai Health Authority's open access support for the healthcare publishing in the Middle East. And Dean is also going to put a link in the chat again to our webpage, or you can, there we go, so that you can read a little bit more about Bakheet's bio. But Bakheet, let's get your video on so we can all see you.
Yeah, good afternoon and good morning for everyone. I think my video is closed from the host from your side. If you can.
All right, let me
Yeah,
see if
start
I can.
now. I think it's there.
There you go. Wonderful. All right, take it away and just say next when you're ready for have me slick the
Sure.
slides.
Thank you very much, and sorry for the small disconnection happened. Okay, my name is Bakheet Beshtawy. I'm working in Dubai Health Authority, the medical library. My slides today content. You can see 7 points. I'll go quickly through them, and I will talk more about Dubai Health Authority library experience during the COVID-19 pandemic time. Okay, the DHA library and COVID-19 article request form, one-click article, the clinical practice guideline, first track for submission, and I will talk also here about the Dubai medical 2 journals, and then little about DHA support to avoid the predatory journals. Next, please. Okay, this is a screenshot from the Dubai Health Authority library website, and you can see here all these resources coming from publishers. Thanks for all publishers at that time. They opened their resources, especially those articles related to COVID, and frankly talking, we benefit a lot from these resources during that time. Here you can see the link of this page. If anyone is interested to use it later, it's fine. Next. We also created a form, and this form was specially only to support the committee. UAE formed a committee for COVID at that time, and we did quite a lot of support for the committee members at that time, supporting them with articles related to COVID. Next, please. The library proud to create a one-click article initiative, and till today we released around 180 something issues. And the good thing with this new one-click article is in one click, the reader will download the article, especially if they are using their mobile or if they are using their iPad. This was a good experience during the pandemic time. People to get newly updated articles about COVID at that time, and all the articles available here. The library staff collect only those open access articles, simply so as they don't need to use a username or password then to read and benefit from those articles. Next. Yeah, this is another screenshot for the one-click article, but in this issue, we created an issue specially for guidelines. I'm not sure the date when we released this, but I think it was in March 2020, and all what's there guidelines, protocols, procedures, around 190 about COVID. DHA staff, and by the way, this is available worldwide. Many people from all over the world benefit from this open access guidelines available in this one-click release. Next. DHA, we have two open access journals in DHA, and we open a fast track submission for Dubai Medical Journal and Dubai Diabetes and Endocrinology Journal. We announced internally and externally for a fast track open access support. Articles with on COVID-related subjects, we gave it a fast track in review. It doesn't mean that it will not go for review or something, but we gave more priority regarding preparing this this paper related to COVID to move on to review. And I think later I have a slide of the total number of articles we published open accessly on or about COVID. Next, please. Here is the two journals published by DHA. You can see we started from 2018. Both are peer-reviewed, double-blinded, open access, and we are in the platinum and diamond category according to the publisher Kardan. Thanks God, the first one is already a Web of Science, Google Scholar, and DOIG indexed, and the second and PubMed in process, and the second one also is in Google Scholar and DOIG, and we just applied for Web of Science and PubMed. Next. Yeah. Here a statistic of what we already achieved. You can see that we received more than 689 manuscripts, published out of them around 220. I think the acceptance rate here is around 29 or 30%. So 220 open access papers already published by DHA through these two journals. 714 authors benefit from this open access. Out of them, 361 from DHA. Out of them, 160 Emirati authors, and we have 33 papers on COVID so far. This is the classification of Kardan publisher. We are in the diamond platinum category. All articles are free for all to read and reuse immediately upon publication. The article processing, the article, the AP, the article ACP, ABC, paid for authors by Dubai Health Authority. No costs for authors, and the authors retain the copyright, and we are using the license, the Creative Common License CC. I am sure all of you are aware of this. Next. DHA support the healthcare professionals to avoid predatory journals. This year, we make a test. We had 61 papers published by DHA author. We found, sadly, that 26 of them actually published in predatory journals. Those papers trapped by such publishers or journals. So we start an initiative, training with online sessions. We did one session so far, how to avoid a potential predatory journal. And at the same time, as you know, usually healthcare professionals are busy, or maybe they don't have the knowledge about what is a predatory journal, or maybe sometimes they are in doubt, and the library created a form, predatory journal publisher guidance form, and by just filling the form, we in the library, we have little or good experience now about how to differentiate and see if the journal selected by the author from DHA is a predatory one or no. You can even now point to this QR code and see the form. Next, I want you to end my slides with this nice quote for Paul Boyle, published in the Times Washington Education newspaper. I am totally agree with him about our experiences through the global pandemic have reminded us that all research should be conducted for public benefit, and our ultimate goal must be to help solve many more global problems beyond COVID-19. At the end, I want to say a big thank you actually to those publishers who opened their resources for UAE. I think we had them for 3 months. Anyone in UAE at that time were able to get articles from, I will mention just quickly, Walter Kluwer, Springer, Wiley, Oxford, and others. And also a big thank you for our suppliers to help us achieve this initiative to open the resources for UAE population. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity to introduce Dubai Health Authority experience with the open access. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bakheet. That was wonderful to hear about what you all were able to do at the Dubai Health Authority. And I'd just like to mention 2 things for our audience. Number one, I lived in Dubai. I have lived in Dubai through the entire COVID epidemic, and so thus far, and the Dubai Health Authority has been extremely proactive and innovative and at the leading edge of responding to COVID. So all of your stories, Dr. Bakheet, are are an example of the experience of the whole Dubai Health Authority. And it also seems that it's a good example of how a unique situation can give an opportunity for organizations to be innovative in trying out new things. And, like your one-click article is great. So look, people, I just want to remind you, we're going to have a Q&A session. We have 2 more talks and then a Q&A session. So please put your questions for Dr. Bakheet or Dr. Natasha in the Q&A box so that we can have an opportunity to have a nice, rich discussion with them afterwards. So thank you again, Dr. Bakheet. All right, so next up, we have my colleague and our co-host and head of publishing today, Emily, is going to talk about the win-win situation in open access textbooks benefits for everyone. So Emily, take it away.
Thanks, Karen. So we live in a digital age, and this is changing how we access and use research. I think everyone's covered that so far today. And it's also changing the role of libraries and the ways they are used by researchers. Now, I love books. I love the way they smell and look and feel. To be honest, my husband would probably say I love them too much. When I moved out to Dubai at the start of last year from the UK, I only brought 2 suitcases. One was full of clothes and the other was full of research books. And given the choice, I'd always rather be hunched over a desk in the library than studying online. but it isn't always possible to access libraries. The key collections for my field are thousands of miles away from Dubai in the UK and the US. And even if your library is only round the corner, COVID has stopped most of us from being able to visit libraries even, and laboratories to conduct proper research during the past 2 years. Now, of course, the librarians have been absolutely amazing during this really difficult period. Only last week, I emailed the London Library, begging them to scan an article from 1967 published in a French journal, and it had never been digitized. And amazingly, they were able to send it within 24 hours. And I think this really highlights how online access to research has become increasingly important over the past 18 months. COVID even, can't pronounce words today, has undoubtedly speeded up the shift towards a more digital focus for education and research. And e-textbooks are a huge part of this transformation, providing access to learning wherever you are in the world. However, these technological shifts have had significant economic implications for libraries and research institutions, and I think it's important to consider some of those explanations before exploring the benefits. Because COVID has not only highlighted the need for online textbooks, but also foregrounds the problems which are impeding true accessibility to these educational resources. And Karen, if you could just skip to the next slide, please. Now, we're all familiar with textbooks. They form the backbone of any educational establishment, whether it's humanities or medicine, prep school or university. And if you work in academia or publishing, you're also probably familiar with the biggest complaint about many textbooks, that they are often extremely expensive. In 2018 alone, the global textbook market achieved over $30 billion in sales revenue. And this is a huge amount. And textbook prices have risen steadily in recent years. A report that came out last year put the average annual increase at 3 times the rate of inflation. Yet obviously, universities, higher education institutions and schools can't just stop using textbooks. They form the basis for lectures, seminar readings, essays, exam revision, and in some subjects, they even contain the exam questions themselves. Next slide, please. The most recent report by PIGR, which is a US public interest group and education fund, contained the following statistics from a 2019 survey of students in America. Of those students, 63% admitted that lack of funds meant they couldn't afford to buy or rent core textbooks. 90%, understandably, feared that this would negatively impact their grades. 25% had to work extra just to pay for these textbooks. And the one that really makes me sad, 11% had to skip meals to pay for these textbooks. And all of these factors meant that 19% of students surveyed said that they actually chose courses and degrees purely based on the affordability of the course materials rather than on their long-term career aspirations. And unsurprisingly, the numbers only worsened in 2020, with 65% of surveyed students stating that they could not afford to buy or rent core texts. The report concluded that the high barrier of textbook prices, both print and digital, were a profound barrier to student success. Next slide, please. Traditionally, students, even occasionally lecturers, I'll admit when I was lecturing I did the same thing, could make use of a range of cost-cutting measures. We could borrow books from the university library. If that's not available, we could get a photocopy of the relevant chapter. We could buy second-hand copies, or even occasionally club together with other friends and fellow students to buy a book and share it around for the term. However, with the shift to e-textbooks, many of these cost-cutting options are no longer possible. Next slide, please. And it's not only students who are affected. Publisher business models can be restrictive and expensive, and this can mean that libraries are prevented from purchasing specific titles or types of content. Lecturers, meanwhile, sometimes have to design courses around what is available and affordable rather than what is the best resource for the student. And this issue can be intensified by the fact that library budgets are, as we all know, finite, and sadly are often chosen to bear the brunt of financial cuts when a university finds itself overstretched and underfunded. And the fact is, ultimately, when students and libraries can't afford core teaching materials, we face the peculiar paradox that although online content is more visible and easier to access in theory, In reality, it is even less accessible than before. Next slide, please. But all of this does not mean e-textbooks are inherently bad. On the contrary, they're excellent. They're a great resource. You can access them anywhere. They can easily and quickly be updated with new discoveries and data. They can be restructured and adapted for new course plans. And therefore, they don't go out of date and are more environmentally friendly because we don't have mountains of moldy old books in rubbish dumps around the world. And more importantly, the issue with high costs can be addressed by adopting an open access publishing model for textbooks. Slide, please. Open access textbooks have been around since the early 2000s and have seen an increasing uptick in usage by universities and educational institutions across the world. And as the volume of open access textbooks and other open educational resources grows, this publishing model has the potential to revolutionize education and even perhaps entirely replace commercial learning materials, producing a more affordable, equitable, and sustainable approach to education. Slide, please. Because ultimately, open access textbooks can benefit everyone, including the publishers. Recent studies show that open access textbooks produce a 10% reduction in failure to read class assignments, resulting in higher student learning rates, better student grades, better student retention, and really interestingly, lower dropout and fail rates. Moreover, open access textbooks ensure consumer choice as well as accessibility. They let lecturers choose the best text for their course and let students choose the best course for themselves, safe in the knowledge that they can freely and easily access the requisite learning materials. In addition, authors get greater control, faster turnaround times, better visibility, increased readership, and better public engagement, as all the papers that we've just been listening to have told you. And also, institutions can benefit from lower access and publishing costs, get permanent access to up-to-date textbooks for all their staff and students, get worldwide recognition for their academic outputs, and burnish their ethical credentials. And as I mentioned, even publishers stand to benefit. If you go on to the next slide. Here at Knowledgey, one of our crucial features of our brand, our corporate ethos, is providing accessible online learning content. We consider this a priority, not only original research articles in high impact journals, but also monographs and, more importantly, textbooks. This is especially true in the wake of COVID, as online and blended learning approaches are gaining more traction in the Middle East. In fact, this is why we're launching our own open access textbook publishing service. But this isn't really a sales pitch, so I'm not going to talk to you about that. I'm just going to carry on to focus on the broader issues. So Karen, next slide, please. The big question is, how can we fund open access textbooks? Like traditional commercial textbooks, open access textbooks are usually written by the faculty members of library and university institutions. However, while the publisher purchased the copyright of the commercial textbook from the author or university and then recoups their cost from sales revenues, as everyone has already mentioned, there's no sales revenue from open access and publishers need to find another way to cover their costs. After all, publishing is a service, or rather a series of services: copy editing, typesetting, HTML and XML conversion, graphic designs, hosting, archiving, cross-ref services, indexing, marketing. It's a very long list. Because whether you opt for print or digital, subscription or open access, good quality publishing is a service, and most publishers are commercial entities, not charitable organizations. So the money has to come from somewhere. And obviously there's a huge load of open source platforms and software offering some of these services for free. And authors can undertake many of the tasks themselves. But ultimately, at some point, someone, somewhere, will usually have to do something that requires payment. And this has resulted in many universities starting to reallocate budgets for licensing e-textbooks to pay for open access publishing. And Milan and Vijay have sort of touched on this already. And it makes sense. After all, if your academics are the ones writing these books as well as reading them, then why should you have to pay publishers to get access to the things written by your staff? So some universities are starting to publish open access books and textbooks themselves. For example, Edinburgh University in Scotland just launched an open access book publishing platform, and University College London is about to follow suit. Other institutions don't necessarily have the infrastructure or capacity to publish their own scholars' work and are instead paying open access publishers like us to produce textbooks for them. Ultimately, it still costs money, but because of the benefits, it's worth trying to figure out new financial approaches to support open access textbooks. Next slide, please. Of course, decisions of this nature require deep-seated and comprehensive changes to the ways in which higher education operates, the sourcing and use of educational resources, and the recognition of faculty contributions. But not only does everyone stand to benefit from open access, but everyone can also work to encourage the development and use of open access textbooks. Institutions can develop policies, libraries can include open access textbooks in their catalogues, lecturers can choose open access course materials, can't talk, and write them, students can demand open access materials, and government policies can support open access programs. And I just want to finish by saying that the MENA region is already at the forefront of digital learning, and we're ideally placed to help lead the global academic community in the adoption of a fairer and more transparent strategy to support learning and teaching in the digital world. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Emily. I think, a lot of our conversation today has been about open access articles. And so VJ really putting open science bigger and you talking about textbooks is really important to our discussion today. So thank you. All right, next up, we have our very own Knowledgey CEO and founder, Kardan. Kamran, if you want to turn your video and your mic on, it would be great for us to see you. And Kamran's going to actually talk about in more detail a lot of the items we discussed in various sessions today about open access business models and who pays the bills. So Kamran, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I think just...
There you are. Now I can see you. Fantastic. Okay. Go ahead.
Great. Hello, everyone. First of all, a big thank you to the fellow panelists for such informative discussions and sessions. And a big thank you to everyone who's attended and still attending today from all around the world, from the region, some of you late hours and some of you leading into the weekend. So that is much, much appreciated. So, yeah, so what I want to talk about today and the way I want to see the whole paradigm is from a different perspective. I am talking about business models, but since it's 10 minutes, I'll just be giving you a general overview of some of them, but this is part of a bigger message and a bigger sort of presentation that I'm giving. Now, as Emily mentioned, and it was mentioned before by Milan, well, publishers are valuable, they're important, they're needed, and there is a cost associated to publishing. For example, if you think of setting up a publishing business, or you do have a publishing business, in order to operate, you have overheads, you have physical space, you have operations, finance, different departments that you have to consider. You've got the production itself. Production includes so many different processes: typesetting, conversion, DOI minting, etc., etc. We talk about the editorial side. Of course, the peer review comes for free, and even the article in a non-open access world used to come for free, but you have many, many services that a free resource is processed, value is added, and it is then provided as a service or a product. You have big marketing operations, and depending on the size, as earlier was mentioned, for example, if you're a new and upcoming publisher, marketing, you need to spend a bigger budget on marketing in order to make yourself known. So these are all costs that are there. And finally, you've got the cost of dissemination, the platform, hosting the platform, and sharing all the content. So at the end of the day, there is a cost to publishing. Can we go to the next slide, please? And someone needs to cover it. Next slide, please. So if we go to publishing before open access, the end user needed to pay to to access the content, right? So this was the case more than 20 years ago. The reality was not everyone could afford access to all the content. So you had libraries selecting some of the content that was needed. You had developing countries, which basically it was too expensive to access all that content. And despite many developing countries' initiatives that had started, like NARI, Agora, etc., content was still not accessible and not many people knew about it. We had the issue that library budgets were maxed out, and still that is an ongoing issue. Dr. Vijay Kumar mentioned double dipping, but we also had the whole argument that research is funded by taxpayers' money, and then taxpayers' money is also used to pay to access it. So there was a double dipping going in on that front as well. I think many of these issues started to lead to the rise of open access, many might argue, but of course there's a bigger picture as well, which I'll cover later on. Next slide, please. So now in today's open access world, we experience and we can see many, many different models. We already discussed the diamond or platinum publishing model, where the publishing process is sponsored by an entity and no one pays for the article processing charges. Then you've got the APC model, where you actually pay for the article to be published in an open access format, either in an open access journal or a hybrid journal. You have the transformative agreements, or as mentioned by Milan, transitional agreements. I took note of that, yes. And many of you know them as read and publish as well. They're models where you have a flat fee agreed with an organization, and then everything is published for free. PLOS have been experimenting with a cap model, where basically you look at the cost of publishing and they add a 10% profit margin to everything, and that's how the model is applied. Of course, there's downsides and benefits to the different models. You have community action publishing, which this was also touched on before, and you've got subscribe to open. For example, there's a Central European University Press. They apply a model where you subscribe, and it is in books. You subscribe to older published content, but and when there are a number of subscribers or enough number of subscribers, then they publish books in open access format. So the bigger that community, the more books that are being published. So there's different ways and different models that publishers are applying and experimenting with. But next slide, please. But the key and what now publishers have been focusing on in order to make this more successful has meant they need to have access to better financial data. The issue of transparency across all areas in the publishing ecosystem. This was touched on by Milan before as something that was also leading to open access. We're talking about cost reduction, but on a cap model, for example, if you reduce the costs, then the profit margin is less as well. So overall, that reduction is subject to different factors. At the end of the day, we're talking about affordability. We talked about are the APC charges affordable? I was actually having a meeting with one consortium in Europe, and this was at the beginning of Plan S, and they were mentioning that they have ended up paying more from their library budget to some publishers than they traditionally used to, but that's okay, because after all the publishing models requiring to be sustainable, finances are not the only factor. So back to my previous slide where I was mentioning that there were some cost elements. You had the double dipping element, you had the shrinking budgets element, but what really is driving the open access is a bigger value. And if we move to the next slide, the issue is not just the affordability, but it's also accessibility. So knowledge needs to be shared and it needs to be available worldwide. And the more people access it, people will benefit. We saw the examples of COVID, of how the pandemic brought people together, and we saw the importance of having access to knowledge. But having said all of that, there are also alternative business models, and Knowledgey as an entity based out of the MENA region has come up with one model which is really following what's happening in the music, entertainment, and various other industries, where you have a small subscription fee, but you have access to everything. So Zendi was our way of also contributing towards a global move towards accessibility and discoverability. So the reality is you have open access, you have still content which are behind paywalls. I was discussing with this with one major science publisher, and I was saying that despite their all the initiatives in open access and them adopting them, still 95% of their content was behind paywalls. So if you look at the at publishers who have been publishing content for a year, let's say if even they move their content to 100% open access models right now, you've still got, for some of them, hundreds of years of content that is there in archives, and these are not are still behind paywalls. So,
all right, Kamran, just so you know, I know you're my boss, but I got to tell you, we're running out of time.
Okay, yeah, I've just got 2 slides more. So the next slide. So basically, as I mentioned, Zendi, the business model is based on individuals subscribing, based on Netflix. Everyone's familiar with the Netflix model, and the cost of subscription is less than the cost of a single article. And you have access to all the articles that are available over there. And the revenue, the revenue model is shared based on the usage of the content. Next slide, please. And before moving to the future, I would like to also mention that Zendi is launched in 7 countries, but also we have Zendi Open, which is our platform for accessing open access content, and that's available worldwide. And it was recently launched officially during the Open Access Week that we are in right now. So the future, the next slide, please. Of course, more publishers will be experimenting with more and more business models and ideas. We discussed the co-creation, where authors are also involved in part of the process, peer reviewers as well. You would see more and more specialized publishing. This would still be subscribed, so many publishers are moving towards specialized databases, which would lead us to a balance between open access content and subscribed content. Analytics will play an important role, but let's think about this. In a completely open access world, we will still have the challenge of accessibility and discoverability. How would you find the content that is relevant to you? And this would lead to the rise of more machine learning and AI-based technologies into publishing. So yeah, next slide. And that's me. Thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kamran. Look, I know that that was a huge topic and it's very difficult to say in a very short amount of time, but you did a great job of hitting all of those key points. And I think what's really valuable for this audience is that I know that even those of us who know a lot about open access learned a lot today, right? So one of the things that what your information is useful for those of you, even those of you who are authors and are thinking about it from a personal standpoint, that this information is really important for you to know when you are advocating in your institution and being the local expert on open access and all of the ways that you can negotiate and engage with the publishers. Understanding what those models are will be super helpful. All right, so what we're going to do, it's time for you guys to get involved again. It's poll time. It's Menti time. Pull out your phones. We're going to do, we got another 3-question quiz to see what you've learned about open access so far today, and particularly from Natasha, Bakheet, Emily, and Kamran. So if you click on the link that Dean put in the chat or go to the QR code, you'll see the next question. So the next question is, whoops, sorry, I didn't advance it. Most open access journals are not peer reviewed. Is this true or is this false? So if you can click on the link in the chat or use the QR code on the screen. So the question is, the statement is, most open access journals are not peer reviewed.
Just to jump in there, Karen, if any of you are still seeing the previous question, there'll be a little wink button at the very top of your screen that says, the presenter has refreshed the screen. Do you want to skip to the next slide? And so do that right at the very top when you're in the Menti thing, and you can skip to the next one.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Emily. Yep. Because you know, when you're the presenter, you don't see what everybody else sees. So, all right, most open access journals are not peer reviewed. Let's have a look at the correct answer. Correct answer is false. Now, this is one of those little bit of a trick question. Most open access, a lot of people think that open access means it's not peer reviewed, and that is not true. Now, there are some journals that are open access that are not, and those are predatory journals, but we've been talking about them all day today. Go to thinkchecksubmit.org to find a checklist of how to determine whether a journal is predatory, and not having peer review is part of that. However, there are over 17, as we learned earlier today, over 17,000 journals in the directory of open access journals, and those have been evaluated and are credible and are peer reviewed. So great, good to see the responses there. All right, we've got another question. Research plays a key role in shifting towards knowledge-based economies. Natasha talked a lot about this. So it's a question, is that true, or is it something else that is part of shifting towards knowledge-based economies? So let's see, research plays a key role in shifting towards knowledge-based economies, true or false? And everybody agrees that that is true. And in fact, it is, of course, moving towards knowledge-based economies. Research is essential for that. So very good. That's a giveaway. That was a giveaway for this audience. And our third question today, in the 2019 PGIR survey, if you're like me or paying attention when Emily read those stats, how many students couldn't afford textbooks in 2019? All right, everybody's saying 63%. Well, Emily, it looks like people were paying attention to your presentation. Yep. And actually, but some of these other numbers, the 25% and the 19% were 19%, I believe, Emily, was the ones who had chose their courses based on what textbooks they could afford. And I think, I don't remember now off the top of my head what the 25% was. Wait, where did it say? I had it written down, but I forgot. Right, so 25% actually had to work extra to pay for their textbooks that they reported. So this is shocking. So it's useful for us to think about, again, and expanding to think about textbooks more than just articles. So we're going to move on. Thanks everybody for participating in this engagement, and keep your phones handy. We've got another quiz after the next session. But what we'd like to do now is actually have a little bit of a conversation, do some question and answers for all these great sessions by Natasha and Bakheet in their own experiences, and Emily and Kamran about business models and e-textbooks. So let me just pull up some of my questions here. And so Emily, Kamran, Natasha, Bakheet, feel free to turn your mics on and your videos on. All right, let's see. Do you think that the world will reach to non-subscription databases and will all be free? Okay, so that's a huge question for everybody, and I'd love to hear basically, particularly from Natasha and Bakheet from this region. Do you think that we will ever get to a place where there will never completely open access for everything?
Yeah,
Natasha, yeah, go ahead.
That's a really interesting question. I think that there could be an upward trend, but it's difficult to say that it'll be a completely open access world because of the need for funding. I think it'll depend on foundations and organizations really taking on that financial burden to allow open access for everyone, really.
Yeah, excellent point. I think anybody else? Bakheet, Emily, Kamran?
Yes, I agree to Natasha, the same thing. I don't think it will go 100% open access research, but what we can see is that the open access collections is going more and more.
Right.
Just to add on, as I mentioned in the presentation as well, there's a trend towards more decision-making support and specialized databases, which they would definitely require payments. But as we're gradually moving towards more open access models, experimented with publishers, there's definitely a raise in that direction. And with the support of state funding, we see countries where they are sponsoring access in the whole country. For example, Egypt and the Egyptian Knowledge Bank, every single citizen, they've got access to a wealth of knowledge and information, and it's been made available centrally, same as the example in Qatar as well, where everyone's access. So with more and more movements of that, you would definitely have more accessibility. But our vision is a more knowledgeable world, so we would love to see easier access and wider accessibility to knowledge around the world.
If I could follow on from that, I find this question really difficult because on the one hand, I'm an open access publisher. I work for a company that really believes in open access, and from the perspective of the end user, it's amazing. You know, as I mentioned before, I'm over here trying to publish papers, and my libraries are one of them's 9,500 miles away. You know, open access, and I'm an independent scholar, being able to get that content is phenomenal. But on the other hand, my background is humanities, and I find there's no funding around for APCs really for humanities things. So I think open access would only really ever be feasible if there was an equitable division of funds across all disciplines, not purely focused on STEM or those big shiny ones that can, you know, cure cancer or achieve social policy goals or burnish a government's credentials in some aspect of the international stage. And also, I think one other caveat, unfortunately, to open access is that ultimately digital poverty remains a huge issue globally, and open access is only really equitably accessible when everyone has access to the internet and has a safe place to access that internet, and that the internet is reliable. Because there's so many people who don't have that, and I think COVID, to go back to COVID again, and the impact that COVID really highlighted the lack of adequate facilities for so many people in so many countries. Even some of the most affluent and developed countries in the world couldn't provide adequate digital resources to their students, particularly students, but more generally in the past year and a half. And I think that's one of the crucial things. It's not just about the open access policies themselves, it's about the underlying infrastructure. We have to fix everything in order to make it feasible.
Excellent point. Thank you so much for sharing that, Emily. And of course, equity is our theme this year, definitely. So I actually have a very specific question for Bakheet and a very specific question for Natasha. So Bakheet, the question is about the tool that you have for identifying predatory journals. And so the real question is, what is underlying that tool? Can you explain that tool a little bit? Is it Beale's list underneath, or is it Think, Check, Submit, or like what's underneath that tool?
Okay, actually from our experience in Dubai Health Authority, we found authors a little bit, they don't have knowledge how to differentiate between a genuine high quality journal or predatory one. That's why we start our initiative to give sessions to make awareness for authors, researchers to understand and know how to differentiate between a real one journal and a predatory one. Actually, there is some lists available there on the net. One of them is the Bales list, which is a very nice one, and we were able to circulate it among the authors to benefit from. And also there is a lot in research about predatory journals. I have 2 slides around maybe 45 references. If you allow me later, Emily, to send it to you, and you can share it here on Zoom for people to read and learn more about predatory journals. But frankly talking, it's not easy. You need a little bit experience with time, because sometimes you have a very nice website and then you find it it's not genuine. Sometimes the name of the journal is attractive, but you find it not. The board of editors, all these things together with time, usually librarians get knowledge or get experience how to differentiate between these journals. Knowledgey, I attended 2 or 3 years ago a very nice lecture with, I think, Mustafa there about targeting potential predatory journals. So it's a matter of experience, reading, awareness, and helping authors and researchers to avoid trapped by such type of journals.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it is very difficult. And as librarians, we're also aware we're constantly trying to teach information literacy generally, right? Skeptical and critical consumption of information, which applies to predatory journals as well as it does to media or anything else. Fantastic. Thank you. So Natasha, I wanted to ask you a question about you talked a lot about the journal, the Jesper journal, and all of your aims and stuff, but based on your process of developing this open access journal, and you said you were new, can you give us some recommendations based on your experience of what that process has been like, and what are things like do's and don'ts? Because I imagine there's a number of people in our audience here also that are thinking about having local journals at their institution, or they already have them and are thinking of converting them to open access. Is there any recommendations or best practices from your personal experience at Jesper that you could share with the audience?
Well, of course, the first is to map the field. What is the theme of the journal, and how are your resources at the moment going to contribute to developing the journal? Like, for example, it actually took us maybe a 1.5 years of planning to launch the journal, and this included sending invitations to well-known scholars who would be able to serve on the editorial board, and also creating our connection with you, Knowledgey, as our publishers. And it's really, it's not easy and it's not quick to create a reputable and high quality journal. You do have to, it also took us a few months to build a pipeline, because the peer review process for a non-predatory journal is actually at least 6 months, because you are having your journals you're having the articles go through 2 or 3 rounds after it's approved for even peer review by your advisory board. So all our articles go through multiple rounds, and it only strengthens the article and the research. So it takes, I would say that the first do is take into consideration the timeline, which can be extensive, and plan, and also funding, right? We are, fortunate, of course, to be funded entirely by the Qasimi Foundation, and having that support is very meaningful. So if you have all those pegs in order, I think it makes it much easier.
Terrific. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, and I do think that that's part of the challenge because you guys made the choice that you wanted to make it open access, right? So that is part of the key funding challenge, as Kamran said, somebody's got to pay, right? So it's finding out who to pay. Yeah, great. All right, I also had another question. I don't know how familiar you guys are on the panel here with Sci-Hub, but the question is, what's the panel's take on Sci-Hub, the present enemy of subscription model publishing and the great friend of all researchers?
Can I take that? Because
yeah.
Yeah, so actually why Sci-Hub has been quite successful is for two reasons. One is providing access to content that is behind a paywall, but also that it's easy to access the PDF of the article. You just put in the DOI and you get the article. And when we were designing Zendi, that's what we had in mind, that, okay, Sci-Hub is illegal. And at the end of the day, we are talking about access, but we don't want to go through pirated sites. We're trying to avoid predatory publishing. So why would we go to a site which is also illegal and not favored by many? So the answer for us was really Zendi. So we tried to create that one-click experience to get the full text, but making it affordable. So the cost of Zendi is less than a single article. And we're hoping that more and more publishers will adopt it and we'll be able to launch it in more and more regions. But we also find it as the middle of the ground way for access to individuals around the world where they can't afford big subscriptions, and to, in general, institutions where they don't have funding in developing countries. So again, the main aim is to make access to research more, make it more accessible. And if it's not to the full price, at least make it affordable. Like if journals were affordable in the first place, maybe we didn't have to flip the business models and move around things. So that's one hypothesis. But I think that's my take on Sci-Hub, and our answer to Sci-Hub was Zendi.
Terrific. Thank you, Kamran. Did anybody else have any comments on that? Okay, well, one of the things we've talked about, both in terms of business models and the effect on authors as well as institutions and publishers, and the predatory journal question, it always seems that they're complicated, right? It depends, it's complicated. So I think what that requires from all of us is doing more and more things like what we're doing today, is sessions and awareness that are educating more and more people about the process so that people can make reasonably informed decisions based on their unique situations. So we're going to move ahead to I want to thank all the panelists, especially Bakheet and Natasha representing the region, and thank you to my colleagues Emily and Kamran, of course, for their terrific contributions. So thank you all so much. And again, we're going to move on to the next session.